check out the rates and stuff.
Yeah.
Hi, everybody. It's Katie Harris. I'm CEO and owner of Nursepreneurs, and I am here with Jill Weberding. Hi, Jill.
Hey, everyone.
I was wondering why my audio was down really low. Okay, so today on InnerGame, we are talking about the ceiling effects and the ceiling limits that we place on ourselves, especially when starting a business or anything for that matter. It doesn't have to be starting a business, but it's kind of the concept of thinking small. And I'm curious, Jill, what do you think the purpose of doing this is? And, let's talk a little bit about thinking small and these ceiling effects that we put, or the ceiling limits that we put on ourselves. What do you think about that?
Oh, you know me, I have lots of thoughts about those things. I think that, initially it's just a safety thing, right? Like we don't want to put a number out there that seems so big that it's unachievable. So we start to, like if we say, well, if I could just make, what I make at my current job, then I would be happy. Or if maybe I can make just a little bit more than that, or if I can make enough to stop having to work overtime or extra shifts or go to outpatient from inpatient, whatever it is, we make these kind of small incremental goals. And that's because they don't seem too scary. They seem achievable and maybe just outside of our comfort zone or just on the fringe of our comfort zone.
Yeah, that was a lesson that I kind of learned early on, because I would ask nurses kind of what their dream income is, and they would say, 100,000, thinking this was a big unattainable number. And I'm like, oh, what about $1 million? Let's go for $1 million. And they would like freak them out. And they were like,
Yeah.
no, you're not
They're
the right
like,
person for me.
or who am I to ask, to think that I deserve that or could get that, could achieve that? What would I do to, make $1 million as a nurse? Like it's so unfathomable in their current vision that it's just off the table, right?
Yeah. But then we see, there's certainly a lot of nurses out there that are pulling in seven figures, that are doing $1 million plus, doing stuff that they love. There's a bunch of nurses that can serve as that role model, but we see them and I think we look at them and say, well, somehow they're special or unique, or, that they were just born to make $1 million or something along those lines.
Yeah, it's but that's not me. Or yes, but I don't have this skill. Or yes, but I'm not connected. I don't already have an audience, a following of 50,000 people. There's always a yes, but that holds us back when you are, have that kind of a vision.
Yeah, and I think that yes, but is one of the things that I have learned over the last couple of years, because I've done this myself. I continue to do it. I don't think I'll ever stop doing the yeah, but now, I'm kind of looking at that but and saying, okay, what is it exactly that I'm saying here? Or what is it exactly that's holding me back? Because I think that's more important than anything, is to understand kind of the root cause of where your but is coming from.
100%. And like this is why the show is called InnerGame, right? Because typically everything that is driving that, self-limiting ceiling is what I call that. Like when we put these self-limiting ceilings on us, or self-limiting ideas, and it's all coming from inner game, and it's usually fear of judgment, imposter syndrome, inner critic, fear of failure. You don't feel worthy of it, so you wouldn't dare even ask for something like that big, right?
Right. Yeah, and it's kind of like when I sit here and think about it, because it's hard for me to remember, some of those feelings. But then I think, okay, a $1 million company, I would just kind of laugh and be like, yeah, that's never going to happen. Like in my mind, I'm thinking that's never going to happen, and it's just kind of like, okay, yeah, now you're doing the same thing that you're telling people not to do, right? Like, why is it so unobtainable? Why is it not possible? And I think those are things that we need to really look at.
Yeah, and it helps, like if you if they start, I always find that it's helpful when someone's starting out, if they kind of have an idea of either who they want to work with or what they want to do. Do they want to be a speaker? Do they want to be, they want to write a book? Do they want to teach courses? They want to just do one-on-one consulting? What is it that they want to do? And then you kind of work backwards, right? Because you have to match the model to a degree with, you're never going to make $1 million if you don't put yourself out there and people even know that they could work with you. Like, how is it, how is it going to happen? There is a law of compensation, out there. So, you have to give in order to get, right? It's a cycle. So if you don't put out, you're not going to get, back.
Right.
So you have to kind of get an idea of, well, what is it that I'm going to give to the world? So I receive, that what I'm looking for as well.
Yeah, and I guess an analogy I could put to it is, it's kind of like, right, like if you sit at home and watch TV every Friday and Saturday night, I guess statistically it's possible your husband to be might knock on your door and whatever, you just meet them that way. It's possible. Right. But highly unlikely. Right. So, you have to really put yourself out there, go to places where that you'd want to meet the type of person that you would eventually marry. And it's the same thing in terms of business. It's putting yourself in that position, in that place where you could create the business that you really want and desire. And the other thing that I would say is, kind of the I don't know if it's really a 180 of what I just said about, I want to make $1 billion or whatever you put out there. A lot of times it's not about that money as well. Like maybe it's, I want to make an impact on 1 million people or 1 billion people or whatever it is. And, just kind of thinking about, and we've talked about this in previous episodes of just what it is that you actually really, really want. And then, thinking outside of the box and thinking a little bit bigger and having a big dream and not being afraid to dream that big dream.
Yes, absolutely. And like you said, you talked about what you really want at the end of the day is to be able to drink a glass of wine and read a good book, spend time with your son. And so you don't need $1 million for that. So one, you need to get clear on what it is you actually want. That's the first step. And then if you have this goal, revenue, income goal, that's great. That's totally fine. But, for me, I also, which is more important, quite frankly, is my impact goal. And when I know that I meet my impact goals, then I'm also going to meet my revenue goals, my income goals, right? But then what drives me is actually the impact. So, you just have to work your way backwards of if I want $1 million, be the CEO of $1 million company, what kind of behaviors would I have to, have? What kind of characteristics would I have to have? What would I have to learn and know and do and, act in order to be the CEO of $1 million company? Probably not what got me to where I'm at right now. Right.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, I think a big part of this too is one, like we've said, just get out there and get started. Even if you don't know where you're going, you don't know how you're going to make money, just starting a conversation with people, start with the audience. Because I had read this one thing about Jerry Seinfeld, and I loved Seinfeld when I was growing up. Well, not growing up, I was in college when he was out, but and just loved him. I just thought he was so funny. And you think that all of this stuff is off the cuff, but one of the things that I've read about Jerry is that he spent a lot of time working. He would spend 1 or 2 years working on a single joke and, just how it would play out. And, when they'd ask him how he was so funny all the time, and it was one, just doing it, right? And two, just perfecting what it is that he did really well. And I think that is something that we need to kind of hammer home here as well, that, the $1 million business doesn't just happen, randomly. It's you being tenacious, persistent, consistent, and getting started.
Absolutely. And he's a great example because most people, if they have never heard him, in an interview, you're right. He's relentless. He is relentless in his pursuit to get better, right? And to, be excellent in his craft. And so you have to approach your business or your niche, the same way. So if you have to get started, and that's where the confidence comes, is in the doing of actually making an offer, teaching a class, speaking in front of an audience. It might be a support group today, but doesn't mean that, your goal might be, a stage of 20,000, but you're going to start, locally, and start honing that message and getting the feedback and, getting better. Be relentless in your pursuit of getting better able to serve the people that you're trying to serve, right? But you have to get started, and to think that you're going to go from zero to, $1 million in the first year, not very realistic. It's, typically more, again, we said this in the beginning, starting a business is a long game. It's not an overnight success. And so you've got to be willing to, okay, well, what are the phases? What's it going to take for me to get there? What are my goals in the meantime? And then, let me put an offer out, and how does that model, how many people would it take to make this quarter goal, this, yearly goal?
Yeah, and I think those incremental steps are helpful too, because then you can kind of normalize a certain income level. You normalize making 100,000 a year, and then you normalize 250, and then you normalize a 500,000, and you can go in that fashion, kind of in the same way that when I teach nurses how to get themselves in media or do podcasts, I'm like, the first podcast we pitch is an Oprah Winfrey, right? That's something, if you want to do that, like the pressure to
The
be
worst
on
you
that
can say is
podcast
no.
is incredible, right? So let's start with a podcast that has, maybe a couple hundred downloads,
Yeah.
and just you get that comfort level at different stages, but then you're persistent and you keep leveling up a notch. If you're always with the little podcast and you never kind of make the next step up, which is a little uncomfortable, then you're always going to be in that same spot. And it's the same thing with the business. You start small, you think big, have a
Yes.
big vision. Don't be afraid to have a big vision.
Big.
Absolutely have a big, but have a stepwise approach to getting to it. You don't want to go, climb Mount Everest in a straight draw.
You do
It's
some training before your first marathon, right? I mean, you don't just
yeah,
get up and say, "Oh, I'm going to do the marathon today." No, like, what did it take you to get there, right? So, I'm always cautious about. I don't want people to get in the frame of mind to. I just want to do a little better, a little more. Like, that is very incremental, more fixed type of mindset. I want that growth mindset. So I really want the big, hairy, audacious, giant goal, and then look at it and break it into chunks and say, okay, well, this is the goal. This is the ultimate, where I want to be. How do I get there? Who do I have to be? What are the, things that I have to do? What are the actions that are going to move the needle to keep me on the trajectory to get there? I don't want to scale back my goal, which is I just want to make 10,000 or 100,000 or whatever. I want to make the 7 figures, but I know that realistically, that's not an overnight success. It takes work to get there. And so what does that work look like? And that's what your 30-day, 90-day, 1 year plan looks like.
Yeah. And actually, just, kind of speaking of Everest, it just triggered a memory in me that I think it's a story that I think people could relate to, because, when you're climbing Mount Everest, and hundreds of people go there every year, you have to spend like 2 months there, right? Because the air quality is so low, and whatever. And, you're basically carrying a bottle of water, and it takes all of your strength and energy to climb Mount Everest. And people have certainly died along the way. But you're just carrying yourself and maybe your bottle of water, and then behind you are the Sherpas, and the
Yeah.
Sherpas are carrying the tents and the food and all the stuff. They're carrying all of this stuff in addition to their body weight, right? So the question was, and they've done research on the Sherpas to say, why are they so special? Like, what is so unique about them that they can do this incredible climb, not just once in a lifetime, but like 5 times a year, whatever it is that
Yeah.
they do, and carry their backpacks and carry your backpack and carry everything that the team needs to survive for those 2 months. And the answer, after like extensive research on these people, was basically there's nothing special about Sherpas. They just get out and they do it, and maybe they don't make it the first time, and they try again and again and again and again, and they just keep doing it over and over. And then, they just
You get
become
better.
these highly yeah, there's absolutely nothing special. And I think the takeaway in business is there's nothing special about the gurus or the very, very wealthy business people that are out there, other than they just kept trying. They kept persisting in what they were doing.
Yeah, you outlast, right? I mean, that's who ends up, winning is whoever outlasts, who stays in the game. You can't win if you don't stay in the game. And there's so many people in business who, want that overnight success, or they want to like replace. I want to replace my nursing income, and work from home. And like, okay, so in what time frame are you going to give yourself to get that? And they're like, oh, well, I mean, I'll give it like a month or two, or, it's like, what? That doesn't even make sense. Like you have to have a framework and an expectation, right? And that's the thing, is that they're not special. They just really expected that, well, of course it's possible. I mean, I'm just walking, right? I mean, obviously I can do that. And they just strap it on and they get better every time with every trip they go. Their endurance builds, their resistance builds. All of that builds in the doing. That's where you gain the confidence. That's where you gain the skills, and the knowing and the knowledge is in the actual experience of doing it. So you have to get out there in order to gain that stuff. If you sit on the sidelines and wait for it to be all perfect and tied up in a nice little bow before you get started, it'll never happen. Right.
Yeah, because no matter how many times you try, are exercising or doing whatever you need to do at low altitude, everything changes at high altitude. And it's like the same in nursing, no matter how many years you spend in ICU, it never prepares you to work in the OR. Like you just have to you're going to stumble, you're going to have some, some missteps and mishaps. And it's the same in business. Like when you first start out in business, we all want that kind of like perfect launch and you start making money, and it's not quite that pretty.
No, it's never like that. I mean, there's no easy button, right? But that's the difference. And nobody ask about that. I would love, instead of the interview of tell me about your most recent launch, I would be like, tell me about your biggest fail, right?
Yeah.
Like just walk me through what your biggest fail was and how you, personally, like got past that, and what did you learn from it, and how did that push you to go to the next, the next one and the next step, and like that's a much more interesting story to me of the resilience and seeing them in the process, because that's what resonates with other people. It's not oh, I just want to have the success that you did. Well, are you willing to do what they did to get there? And a lot of people are not. So, when you create your big lofty goal, whether it's, whatever ceiling you want to put on yourself, I don't particularly like ceilings, but if I'm going to put one, it's going to be pretty darn high, for me. And then you work your way backwards and say, okay, well, if that's my goal and that's what I want to do, and, the kind of life I want to live, then who do I have to be and what actions do I have to take in order to stay on that trajectory and get to that place?
Absolutely. And I think you just came up with our next episode. Maybe we can talk about our biggest failures
Yeah,
and
right?
walk them through that. Yeah, because I think that would be helpful for people to kind of see that, because it is. And maybe we can bring some other nurses on to talk about it as well. So it might be fun.
The first draft never gets published, right? It's the first draft. It's a work in progress.
Yeah.
The first course outline, the first draft of your book, the first, blog post, the first video you do on YouTube, like you never want to go back and watch again. But you just have to get out there and get the experience, and then you learn so much in that process that you just absolutely get better as you continue to go. And that's the way in every aspect of business. That's the way it works. Like it's the experience part. That's when the learning happens. Just like nursing school. Yes, we get the foundation, but the learning really happens once you're on the job, right? Like once you're in it, once you're in the trenches, say like surgeons. Well, the anatomy didn't look like that in the book. Nope, it didn't.
I could clearly define, the structures in the book.
I knew exactly what that looked like, except it doesn't look anything like that, right? That's where the experience happens. And if you have somebody that you are, I think we do this, we idolize, right? We pick some person that we're looking up to, and then we're saying, oh, I want to have that kind of success. I want to be that kind of speaker. I want to have, that kind of impact or influence or whatever it is. And, get into, like, ask them, how did they get there? Like, what was there probably is a, post or an interview, or just flat out ask them, like, tell me what are the biggest lessons you learned or some of your biggest failures, because they're happy to share those. Like, they're not worried about someone thinking that they suck, or they're not good. Like, they've already been through it, right? You're never going to get criticized by someone who is, further along in the continuum than you are. You're only going to be criticized by the people who are not where you're at, because they're looking up going, oh, because they're afraid to get going, right? They're afraid to get started. But anybody who's beyond your level, they go, oh, I remember that. Oh yes, I remember my first launch, right? And you can all have some laughs about, oh, you should have seen my first draft. It kind of looked like my 7th grade, essay or something. It's like, what? So yeah, if you're idolizing someone, just keep it in perspective that they weren't born that way. They didn't just show up that way. They did a lot of work and stayed in the game in order to make sure they were, on the trajectory to get to that.
Yeah, and I would say my biggest kind of like lead up to business or trial period was my dissertation for my PhD. It was something that, oh my God, it sucked the life out of me. It was just, I couldn't come up with an idea for my chair and my committee. Everything I submitted, they're like, this is crap, this is crap, this is crap. And then, and then one day, I was actually I took a vacation. I'm like, I need some time off. I need time off from work. I need time off from school. So I was down in South America and just kind of walking the streets of Santiago, Chile, and just walking. And I'm like, I really miss work. And then I started thinking about work. And then I was like, well, what would it be like not to have to go, if you couldn't go back to work? And then started thinking about our neurological patients. And then it just kind of like, it all came from there. And then, my dissertation ended up being illness perceptions and how they relate to going back to work after subarachnoid hemorrhage. So the whole thing kind of came together once I kind of was able to. But the whole thing with my dissertation was pure persistence. Just, it didn't have much to do with my intellectual level as much as it had to do with my persistence to find a question that needed an answer to. And it wasn't easy, and it's not like somebody just gave me the question, here's the question, go figure it out. You had to come up with it. And it was the same in business, because I've certainly have had multiple different businesses, and most of them don't exist today. It's just kind of like, I gotta find the
what
right
it
answer.
is yourself, right? That's part of the process. Like, you've got to figure it out for what it is for you. Because if someone just says, oh, here's the answer, it's the same thing if you got kids and they're like, would you just tell me the answer? I'm like, I already know the answer because I'm out of 4th grade. Okay. Like, you need to figure out what the answer is, or figure out how you go about finding what the answer is, because that's the only way you're going to, continue to get better and know what to do the next time. Right. If someone just hands you the answer all the time, and say, oh, well, you should do this. And you're like, okay, I guess I'll do that. Like, you're not invested in it, right? You have to go through that part. And so, like, for you, when you took time to sit in the silence and, in South America and be like, well, what is it that I would really miss? And what, like, that just started triggering. Like, I wonder what that would be like. Like, imagine if I did have a hemorrhage and I was faced with this. All of a sudden, our identity is so much, wrapped around what it is that we do, our role, where we work, how we perceive ourselves. But that's not actually our identity. That's just what we do. It's not who we are.
Right. But it was empathizing with, that kind of, that feeling of what it would be like. And we certainly have a lot of students that do that. They've taken on the empathetic role to, really look at their audience and say, okay, what is it that they're struggling with? And, what would it feel like, and how can I fix this? And I think that's a huge way to approach a business, a hugely positive way.
Yeah. So. And that's really our gift. That's our superpower from a nursing standpoint, to have that experience and that training as a nurse, that we do, typically see our patients as a whole patient. We look at it from a wellness, not just an illness standpoint. And we really, we connect. And because we spend so much time with patients and their caregivers, we really do have that empathy. We really can feel, what they're feeling a lot of the times, or understand what they're feeling, where they're coming from. So we are perfectly suited perfectly suited to be the people to help offer solutions when we see those gaps. Don't wait on the organization to fix it, because they're not. They're counting beans. They're not going to do it. Like, I mean, that's why we know people are, Gwen has done her own prototype because like nobody listened. This is not what you need. We need a product. And so she went out and created one. I mean, nurses are perfectly suited. We're in the trenches. We know the gaps. We see them on the front lines to solve those problems, whether it's a product or education or an approach or coaching or whatever it is. I mean, we that's our superpower, is our empathy and identification of the real gaps in health and wellness space, to be there. Like, I mean, that's a huge step ahead that we have compared to other people.
Yeah. All right. So let's wrap this up with some of our key points here. So we're talking about, I guess, thinking small and putting ceilings on our dreams, and what can we do to maybe not do that, or how do we move forward?
Yeah. So for me, self-imposed ceilings are, one, I want to know why I'm, saying that I'm only, it's usually about your identity, that you think you're only worth making $10,000 a year or $100,000 a year. You don't feel like you could deserve, or what would I do? You just can't envision it. So to me, it's about doing that work ahead of time, of that you have to separate your worthiness from your actual achievements and accomplishments, and then say, well, just ideally, what would I want my life to look like? So you got to get clear on what you want, and then this is my income goal, this is my impact goal. But make those huge. Like, don't be scared of making big lofty goals. There's lots of nurses that are more so now, thankfully, and with nursepreneurs, we're seeing even more and more come to the spotlight, who are doing these amazing things that we're not used to seeing nurses do. It's way beyond the bedside. So, get in those groups where you can see some of those mentors who are nurses who are making this big, huge impact, and, look at what they're doing. How did they do it? What was their, trajectory? And then you make that goal, that big lofty goal, and work your way backwards. Who do I have to be in order to put myself on the trajectory to do, what I want to accomplish?
Awesome. Well, Jill, it was great talking to you again this week, and I look forward to having more discussions with you in the next Inner Game.
All right. Sounds great. We'll see you next week.